The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So someone who does not have a particularly bright future in the 2020 Democratic primary is former Maryland Congressman John Delaney. However, he has released an interesting policy proposal that I want to talk about, which is a mandatory national service plan. He is talking about this as something that would bring a shared purpose and inspirational element or force to the United States of America. It would be mandatory. All Americans upon high school graduation or upon turning 18, if born after the year 2006 and phased in over time, would provide 2 years of free tuition at a public college or university, 3 years of tuition for those who extend their national service single year to 2 years, and it would be deployed through an act of Congress. And there would be all sorts of different activities that would qualify. I haven't looked at the full list, and I don't know, Pat, that he has actually put that out. This is actually a really interesting idea. It is a sort of more, what would you call it? A more progressive version of a national draft, in a sense. Instead of forcing people into the military, you are saying you have to provide some kind of national service, which can be working for nonprofits. It can be poverty reduction, working in health, whatever else the case may be. I think it's fascinating. It is a complete non-starter. It will not become a reality anytime soon, but I'm still interested in the proposal, and I think it's an interesting idea.
Well, I think you certainly have to have non-military options if you're going to come up with an idea like this in 2019.
Yes.
And that's what he's done. So there's the military is option one. There's also participating in infrastructure apprenticeships. Thirdly, you could pursue community service projects. And then lastly, you could join the newly formed Climate Corps, which sounds very, very exciting. Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's interesting to mandate that 18-year-olds, people fresh out of high school, do an active service like this for an entire year of their lives, to make it mandatory. I don't know if I agree with that so much, though. I mean, I think it would create some sense of like unity across the country, some sort of like feeling as if we're all in this together and we're all participating in making our country better. And I think that's all great. Making it mandatory rubs me the wrong way, though. I think that what would be a better path forward with something like this is making it so it's like a prerequisite for college. Like pretty much every college and university across the nation makes it so that if you want to enter their school, that's like one of the things that you kind of have to have on your application, that you went to high school and you have the SAT scores and all that, but you also dedicated 1 year of your life to doing something like this, assuming it becomes like a full widespread national program.
I think that that's a good idea. The problem is I think it'll exacerbate some of the culture differences that we have in the United States, because you already have a division culturally between those who see college and university as an integral part of sort of learning how to think, et cetera. And then on the other hand, you have a growing movement that sees college and university as liberal indoctrination. If you add the requirement of having to have this giving back year in order to get into college, you are further going to create a divide, an empathy divide, a values divide. And while I think it's a good idea, I think that it could have that unintended consequence.
Yeah, hopefully that values and empathy divide would be made up for by the project itself, right? By bringing people together. I just think that's a better path forward, because I don't think I don't think the government should be forcing people to do things. Well, I mean, certainly you have to pay taxes.
Thing, anyway.
you have certain responsibilities. You have certain duties. But to commit an entire year of your life, I mean, that seems to be a bit over the top to me. So yeah, I mean, I think it's great that there's non-military options. I think you have to have that. And it would be interesting. It's also easy for us to say that these 18-year-old people and people fresh out of college should be doing it, and not us, right? Like, we're making the rules for the next generation.
Of course.
And we don't have to abide by them ourselves. Like, it's always easier to do that when you're not directly impacted by it.
Naturally, and that's the way it should be now that I would not be subject to this, of course. No,
right.
I'm thinking of, in Israel, there is a mandatory couple of years of military service, and I do believe that there are more sort of like social giving back type options for people, and that even though it is still all generally under the umbrella of military, I guess I'd have to review the details, but I think that there are options there that are more like what John Delaney is suggesting here, depending on what it is that one is interested in doing. But I'd have to review the details to be sure.
Yeah, I think there'd have to be exceptions. I'm sure that there would be exceptions to this. It's a good idea. When asked how John Delaney would pay for this, though, he didn't actually have concrete numbers for how. He essentially went into a platitude about how this is America and we can pursue and reach all these lofty goals. This is the same guy that's against Medicare for all because he thinks it's unrealistic and unaffordable. This is the same guy that is opposed to free college because of the same reasons. It's interesting how he's able to pick and choose when he wants to use that platitude.
Yeah, in his defense, I don't know that this would be that expensive because, yes, there would be a bureaucratic cost associated with it. But remember that a lot of the things that these 18-year-olds would be doing would actually be providing value and generating value and positive externalities within society. So I actually don't know that it would be that expensive, partially because you're talking about free labor in a sense, right? I mean, it doesn't appear as though the individuals would be paid for this year of work.
I totally agree with you there, but you can make the same case about Medicare for all and free college. If you have students going to university for free, not being burdened by student debts for years and decades after, then they can participate in the economy more. That boosts the economy. Same thing with Medicare for all. If people are able to obtain medical services and healthcare when they need it, then they're not dragged down by medical costs, subject to medical bankruptcies, and it makes the country better. So, again, picking and choosing, but I totally agree with you on that point.
Oh, no question. This guy's definitely a hypocrite, but at least as far as this idea goes, I think there are some interesting elements to it. A federal judge earlier this week overturned the Trump administration's approval of a plan by the state of New Hampshire to impose work requirements on people who want to get Medicaid health insurance benefits. And the ruling came after this has already been previously blocked. It has been blocked again. The idea is that this is not an okay thing because it will definitely cause a whole bunch of people who, in terms of income limits, would qualify for Medicaid to end up losing health insurance benefits. And for me, it's just so much more fundamental. The point of Medicaid is to get health insurance to people who are below a certain economic level. If you then come in and say you have to be working or impose other requirements, it just defeats the purpose of the program. You are relitigating the purpose of the program. You can do that. You could say this is a program for health insurance for poor people who are working. That's just not what the program is, and it makes complete sense to me that it would be struck down on that basis.
Yeah, I don't think that this idea that New Hampshire had made any sense at all, especially because when you're talking about some people who are poor and qualify for Medicaid to begin with, maybe they're not working in the first place, and that's what got them into that situation. Maybe they have some serious health problems that they have to work out, and because of our health insurance system in the country, they've had to pay all these bills, and now they're broke, and now they have to go on to Medicaid, but they're still sick. They still can't go back to work, and they still need health care. What are they supposed to do in that situation? With this bill, if this was passed, then they'd have to be working at the same time that they're horribly sick. And, of course, that's not going to be good for anyone. So I'm glad that this was struck down. Total buffoonery by the Republicans on this.
Yeah, there's no shortage of different ways that Republicans will try to just take away benefits from people. And this is their goal. I mean, they don't hide it. We don't have to pretend that their motives are anything other than that. Sometimes they'll couch it as we want to make sure that everybody is incentivized to be a productive and well-adjusted member of society. And by imposing a work requirement on Medicaid recipients, we are going to get a whole bunch of people back into the workforce and all of these different things. They also don't seem to realize in some way that that is also going to dilute the workforce and it may reduce wages. I mean, literally the same argument that they make for allowing the minimum wage to be as low as any employee is willing to accept, that same sort of mathematical argument would arguably reduce wages if you force all Medicaid recipients, even people who are ill, into having to work. Like their principles don't matter when they have some broader overarching principle, like let's kick people off of benefits. And this is what they're trying to do, and we've got to fight them at every step of the way.
Yeah, and they were often willing to hold on to that idiotic ideology even when it is counter to something that will help them and help their state. Like many states refused the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act, and many millions of Americans were unable to get health insurance because of that. Republican governors, many of the times, didn't even care. Some took the expansion, sure, some didn't, because they wanted to stand on principle. Well, how many people have to die needlessly for you to stand on that principle? Especially when it's something that it doesn't specifically even affect your state with regards to how much you're paying out. This is something that's supported by the entire country. You're just turning down the benefits. It's ridiculous.
So this was the right decision by a judge, but remember that these decisions can go the opposite way and they can go the wrong way. And that's why it's important that we elect people who aren't even going to try this stuff in the first place, because we know we can't just rely on the judge, on the courts to make the right decisions all the time. Often they don't. And that's why we need to have people in place who aren't even going to try this stuff to begin with. Speaking of who is in place voting on stuff that affects us, the Senate has failed to override Donald Trump's veto of a bill stopping Saudi weapons sales. So there was a bill to stop U.S. sales of weapons to Saudi Arabia. Donald Trump vetoed it, and the Senate has failed to override it. They need a 2/3 vote to override a presidential veto. They had only a 45-40 vote with 15 senators not voting. 5 of the 53 Republicans did vote to override Donald Trump, which is interesting, but 15 people didn't vote, and alas, it didn't happen. What do you think this is more related to, Pat? Do you think this is more related to the specifics of our relationship with Saudi Arabia and how senators view it? Do you think this is more related to the relationship between senators and Trump, and that's why you had so many no votes who didn't want to be on one side or the other? Like, what is this ultimately about?
Well, what's puzzling to me is how it seems like the American executive, the American president, regardless of if he or she is Republican or Democrat, they're going to have this inexplicable tie to Saudi Arabia, and it's like they can't even be convinced out of it. And I apply that to Trump, and I apply that to Obama. So even though the Congress overwhelmingly was opposed to this arms deal and supporting Saudi Arabia, especially in the wake of what happened with Jamal Khashoggi, Trump is going to ignore them and do his own thing. And luckily, he knows that he's not going to have his veto overridden because they just don't have the numbers to do that. Barack Obama, in his entire 8-year presidency, only had one veto override, and that also had to do with the topic of Saudi Arabia. Congress overwhelmingly passed a bill that would allow victims of 9/11, for the most part, to sue the Saudi state because they were sponsoring terrorism. So they argued, and Barack Obama vetoed it, even though it was passed overwhelmingly by both houses. They overrode his veto. It was the one time that it happened in his entire presidency. It's interesting that that's what it took, is an issue of Saudi Arabia, a Saudi Arabia-related issue in Obama's presidency, and now it's happening with Trump, although with Trump's not going to have it overridden. He's going to have the final say on this.
Trump's argument was that not doing the arms deals would be bad for the American economy because so many people work for the arms manufacturers that are producing the weapons that we are selling to Saudi Arabia. And so economically, it would be bad. The reason that argument particularly falls flat for me is that the damage that would do economically, if you believe Donald Trump's explanation, is nothing compared to the damage that's being done by Donald Trump's tariffs on China, rather, to American companies. So, like, if Donald Trump's concern is we need to put aside our feelings about a country and just do what's best for American jobs, well, applying that to the Chinese tariffs would have led him never to put those tariffs in place to begin with. So, like, that literally cannot be the explanation why. And obviously, we know it's not the explanation why, although it doesn't change the reality that the deal is going forward.
Yeah, I remember when he essentially said that he doesn't care about the Jamal Khashoggi killing because Saudi Arabia has this massive arms deal with us. It's like he was saying the quiet part out loud. You're not supposed to say that it's going to directly benefit the military-industrial complex if we have this giant multi-billion-dollar deal with Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
You're supposed to just kind of ignore that part and stay sort of diplomatic about it. It seems like he's the first president who doesn't even care about that stuff because he doesn't get called out on it. He does certainly by some elements of the media, but it gets overblown.
I think there's another element we're not even saying, which is I think sometimes it's just Trump being honest in the sense that it's not that he particularly doesn't care. He doesn't realize that he's saying the quiet part out loud in some of these cases. Like, they all think it, but Trump just doesn't have the wherewithal to recognize that you're supposed to sort of not say some of this stuff. And it's refreshing in a sense, but at the same time, it's disturbing to just confirm our worst fears about the motivations for many government decisions that are made.
Yeah, it's like Trump's recent "send her back" chant at one of his rallies, or the "go back" tweet that he sent right before it. Like, I think many Republican politicians feel that way about minority members of Congress, minority Americans in general, but they know that you're not supposed to say that, especially when the people are actually Americans and they're not even immigrants to begin with.
Right.
Trump is willing to say the quiet part out loud, though, and that's why he got into a little bit of trouble over the past 2 weeks over those tweets.
Right. With the immigrant stuff, you're supposed to all couch it as the fabric of America and making sure America remains American and all of these different things and try to put a positive spin on it. But increasingly under Trump, even his followers are starting to just say what we've known it to be all along. And in a sense, I appreciate it only in the sense that we can actually fight things for what they are, as opposed to having to fight bogus talking points and recharacterizations of what these things are. Like, in that sense, I'd rather fight someone who just says, I don't want brown people in the country, because they're just being upfront about what is actually underlying their political belief.
Yeah, and as horrible as that is, at least they are arguing in good faith. Like, they do actually present their opinions, and you can sort of deal with that and hopefully de-radicalize them. This kind of goes to the video that you made, the story that we covered last week, which was sort of your direct message to the audience, saying that Trump supporters, we would take you a lot more seriously. We would have a lot more respect for you if you were just open and out front about why you support the president and why you believe the things that you believe.
Yes, I wouldn't agree with them anymore, but at least I would be able to have a conversation that's based in reality as opposed to in hypothetical fantasy land. All right, that does it for today. Regular week next week. Regular week the week after, I think. But then the week after that will be David Pakman Show Summer Vacation. But still plenty of content between now and then. We will talk about what will be going on during that week. It will be different than in the past. But much before that, long before that, we will have a new show and a new bonus show on Monday.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.